Down suffered the agony of hearing a minister giving my own speech, and as the record shows, he was constantly interrupted. There were obviously a great deal of feeling about it, and we knew we were in for serious trouble when Mr. Gaitskell started. He gave a most impassioned oration.
I believe with all my heart that the existence of this remarkable multiracial collection, association of independent nations stretching across 5 continents, covering every race, is something that is potentially of immense value to the world.
Hugh Gaitskell in some ways stood as a bulwark against racism. For him, anti-racism was a kind of fundamental foundation stone, a talisman, something he couldn't move away from at all. And this led him, I think, to this tremendous opposition to the 62 Act, and in doing that he set a moral tone for the whole of the Labour Party.
I was then a backbencher and listening to Gaitskell, and as a really effective speech in the House of Commons does, you know, it made one ashamed to be sitting on the side of the house that you were.
The government's plans to discriminate between British subjects provoked fury, not just among student demonstrators, but also among some senior Conservatives.
I remember Rab Butler being marched up and down the corridors of the House of Commons by Alan Lennox Boyd, who was then Colonial Secretary, telling him, as it were, what misery this would cause to the inhabitants of Antigua or Barbados or something. And I remarked later that they hadn't got any votes, and the people in this country had.
But Britain was also the destination of 50,000 Irish immigrants each year who came in search of work. Their entry was uncontrolled, revealing that the government was restricting immigration on grounds of colour.
At the time, it did seem to an awful lot of people that it was indefensible that you should be savagely restricting the intake of Commonwealth citizens from Jamaica and from India and from Pakistan, while you were allowing completely free access to area which wasn't even a member of the Commonwealth.
It fell to my colleague and me to explain the difficulties of making any sort of concession on this point. We pointed out, for example, the difficulties of policing the border between Southern Ireland and Northern Ireland, a subject which wasn't quite as familiar then as it's unfortunately become since.
In fact, Rab Butler went beyond allowing Irish immigration to continue. Behind the scenes, he was seeking Ireland's help in reducing Commonwealth immigration to Britain.
Long before the bill was prepared, he sent me to Northern Ireland and I had discussions there. But I'm not going to go into those discussions, obviously. There are such things as state secrets, you know.
The arrangements made with the Irish Republic were in effect for them to exercise immigration controls over immigrants coming from overseas. Otherwise, I mean, it would be only too easy to come into Southern Ireland, then go into Northern Ireland, and then simply into Great Britain.
London Airport, the 1st of July 1962. An historic day for the Commonwealth as the first of its citizens arrive who do not automatically have free entry into the United Kingdom. An act variously described as shabby, tragic or distasteful but necessary comes into force and Commonwealth citizens queue with aliens.
The doors were closing. The British Immigration Service could now determine the fate of British subjects from Commonwealth countries.
The fact that I might be influencing, for good or ill, the lives of other people was to me just one of those things. It didn't cost me any sleepless nights. Somebody has to do this kind of job, and I was quite happy to do it.
The rules still allowed the immigrants' families to come and join them, and some members of the British establishment wanted tougher controls.
There was a great deal of rather sentimental and quite mistaken view that you couldn't possibly part them from their families. And so their family was allowed to come too, which is quite unnecessary.
Immigrants and their families continued to settle in the inner cities. This led to tensions, particularly in the West Midlands.
Smethwick, a black country town, suddenly had deposited upon it a very large number of immigrants, coloured immigrants. There was intense feeling against them.
They're a nuisance when you've got to walk past them in the streets, they won't move. They're a nuisance at work, they won't work. And for folks who got them living by them, they're a nuisance, more nuisance still.
I've got to bring this little boy up amongst them, and they're not clean, and the smell of the cooking makes you feel sick.
What are you doing positive in Smethwick to help coloured people? You seem to have no answer, sir. Well...
The Conservative candidate for the '64 election was Peter Griffiths. He hoped to unseat the Shadow Foreign Secretary, Patrick Gordon Walker.
I remember very little about the campaign except the slogan. The slogan which Mr. Griffiths, I think, said he didn't use, but certainly other people used: if you want a nigger for a neighbour, vote Labour.
I remember travelling on the Midland bus from Handsworth to Smethwick. The slogans was all over the place. The walls were daubed with black paint. If you want a nigger for a neighbour, vote Labour. It really pained me in the stomach. I was gutted, really.
We didn't believe that it would be a potent enough weapon to defeat the potential Foreign Secretary. And I remember doing a big rally with Patrick Gordon Walker when Harold Wilson came, and we all said, "Are you going to be all right, Patrick?" And Patrick had no doubt that he was going to hold it because he believed that the innate decency of the electorate would see him through.
I had the constituency next door called All Saints, where exactly the same problem existed.
All Saints Labour Party?
But Patrick and I took quite different views on how to cope with it. Patrick and I addressed a factory gate meeting, and he said, in effect, not quite as boldly as this, but he said, in effect, that it was all the fault of the Tory government anyway, who had let all these immigrants in. I was furious with him. If you're a person who is worried on the race issue, why vote for Patrick Gordon Walker when you can vote for Peter Griffiths and have the full Monty?
Gordon Walker, Patrick, Christian.
Labour.
14,916. Griffiths, Peter, Harry, Steve.
Conservative.
16,000. 16,690.
The overwhelming memory I have of Smethwick is election night and horror that having lost. Horror because I like Patrick, horror because we'd lost a safe Labour seat, but horror that this had become a force in British politics. It was there now to be countered.
I suffered utter disillusionment. When I saw that, I thought, oh God, I was so wrong in my own thinking about Britain. When I went to work, I was working in the factory at the time. I could look at my mates, people that I normally would talk to, share a cup of tea with. I couldn't do it.